welcome into Arctic-like Atlanta. It is a national championship weekend. This is the Bama Insider podcast. I'm Aslan Hajavandi, alongside Bama Insider beat writer Tony Tsoukalas. Tony, how are you, man?
Cold, like you mentioned. I'm bundled right now. I've got a sweater and a jacket on, and we're indoors in a hotel in Atlanta. I wouldn't have figured it this way.
Thankfully, the game will be played indoors. Hopefully, it won't be nearly as cold as it was last week inside the Superdome. We just got done with the press conference on the eve of championship night. Kirby Smart and Nick Saban both on the podium. And here we are, Tony, on the year where maybe the SEC was on its deathbed, perhaps, some people thought. Two teams from the same conference, the conference that matters most, where it just means more, both playing in the national championship. Did we foresee an all-SEC championship? Did we ever foresee an all-any conference championship when we went to this playoff with four teams?
Well, I think if it was going to be any conference, just because it's happened before, the thought was that it was going to be SEC, but not this year. I think people were ready to write the SEC's obituary this year. I mean,
myself included.
If Georgia and Alabama were to lose last week, I think that we're writing a whole different story about the SEC and how it's really fallen off. And now, it's guaranteed a national champion. And, Georgia and Alabama really bailed out the conference this year because it was a down year for the conference, but they did end up having the two best teams.
Listen, last year it was Alabama and 13 other teams. It was Alabama and then 13 other teams that had 4 or more losses. This year it's Alabama and Georgia and 12 teams that have 4 or more losses. But I guess you can say that pretty much with every other conference with the exception of the Big Ten. So, again, as a guy who's born and raised in Florida, just in full disclosure, I went to Florida State, so I have a little bit of saltiness towards Alabama right now, but it's fine. I respect you guys. What conference really does have a bunch of teams that only have 1 or 2 losses? I mean, every conference, Pac-12, Big 12, they got 1 or 2 good teams, and then a whole bunch of kind of middling teams around. So it's kind of par for the course. I just think the whole ubiquity, the domination of the SEC 2008, where it's Alabama, it's Florida, it's LSU, it's going to be 1 or 2. It's no longer, I don't think we're going to see 4 teams in the top 10 all year long. It just doesn't feel like that's going to be it. Keeping in that same sort of theme, Alabama, quote, snuck in to the playoffs. Some people could say, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think when you're Ohio State and you get half 100 hung on you against Iowa, you don't belong in there. But Kirby mentioned that in the press conference earlier. He kind of pointed at us, the media, for giving perspective to Alabama, a little chip on their shoulder for saying that they don't belong, and that kind of is something he fears, is the motivation. Is this the most motivated Alabama team we'll see all year long, or is that Clemson game the most motivated team we'll see all year long?
It's hard to argue against that Clemson game because that's something that every single key moment of this season, Alabama players have been bringing up that Clemson game. When they had to battle a little bit against A&M, it was the Clemson game. When they, held Tennessee at a goal line stand up by like 50. They talked about the Clemson game. Everything came back down to that Clemson game. So that's what the players were remembering. That being said, though, if you give this Alabama team any excuse to have a chip on its shoulder, it likes that. This is a team that when we saw inside the locker room last season, it said this quote. It said Alabama overrated. And they credited national media. They just made up a quote and credited national media. So they're looking for reasons to have a chip on their shoulder. So if you give them anything, they're going to take it.
I asked Nick Saban this yesterday at Media Day. He was so excited after the Clemson game, talked about the warrior-like intensity, right? Like the refuse-to-lose sort of attitude. And I asked him if on such a short week, if you can still expect that from your team or if there's a little bit of a push and pull. Is there going to be can you have a letdown in a championship game? In terms of, attitude, pep, whatever you detected at Media Day or saw at practice yesterday, what's your feeling like going into this game?
They definitely don't look like they have a letdown, but it wouldn't surprise me if there was some on both sides. If you look at Alabama, they just played a Clemson team that they've been gearing up to play all season. It kind of always felt like Alabama was going to play Clemson at some point, and they finally got to redeem that championship loss from last season. And if you look at Georgia, it's the same case. They played a really roller coaster game against Oklahoma, and it's going to be hard for both of these teams. And we've also mentioned the short turnaround. It's only a week, so neither team, I don't think, has given an indication that that's going to be the case. But would it be surprising if, come Monday night, there is a little bit of a letdown? I don't think it'd be surprising either way.
It's the Bama Insider Podcast. I'm Aslan Hajavandi alongside Tony Tsoukalas, talking about the upcoming Georgia-Alabama national title game. So when we're talking about football, I mean, the thing for me is you always want to talk about quarterback play, right? It's going to come, which quarterback is going to make the most plays. But I feel like it's Alabama, it's Georgia. It's probably not going to come down to a quarterback. I mean, what are some of the things, deciding factors, key sort of matchups you're figuring to kind of determine who's going to walk out of Atlanta as a national champion?
When Kirby Smart was asked what he's concerned the most about, he mentioned the trenches, the defensive line and the offensive line, and I really think that's going to be where the game is won. If Georgia can control if Georgia's offensive line can control the line of scrimmage and they can get those two running backs, churning, it's going to be really hard for Alabama to stop that offense. But if Alabama can stop the run, it's the number one run defense in the nation, you force a freshman quarterback to pass. I know Jake Fromm's a good quarterback, but that's not what Georgia wants to do. And so if Alabama can control that and force him into passes, I think that you might be able to force him into a mistake, and that's where Alabama can really I think take advantage of this game.
Clemson was so much more explosive. I think we all assume more explosive offensively than what Georgia is. But, I mean, at no point did Clemson string together anything that remotely looked like a competent offense against Alabama.
They did not. But I'll argue with you on this. I like Georgia's offense a lot better than I like Clemson's offense.
Really?
I didn't really ever see Clemson's offense doing anything against this Alabama team. I mean, I think, I didn't really see a lot from Kelly Bryant. From what he's a talented player, but he wasn't the kind of quarterback I didn't think that was going to really beat Alabama. And then you had a freshman running back in Etienne. I mean, if you look at this Georgia offense, you've got 2,000-yard running backs that I really think can be difference makers. And then Jake Fromm, I think, can actually hurt more in the passing game than anything Kelly Bryant could do. So I think if you can get these running backs rolling, that Jake Fromm could kind of open up the game in the passing game a little bit more than Kelly Bryant could. So I'm actually, from an Alabama standpoint, I think they should be more concerned about this Georgia offense than they were against the Clemson offense.
I just think, if you're going to, Georgia's whole thing is what they're going to try to out-Alabama. Like, they're going to try to run the ball better than Alabama. They're going to try to be more physical than Alabama. Like, that doesn't seem like a winning recipe.
That is true. I mean, you don't see a lot of teams beat Alabama with that downhill style. I will say one thing Georgia has in its advantage is Anthony Jennings, the outside linebacker for Alabama.
Right.
Man, if there was one game that Alabama needed a player like him, a big linebacker that can shut out the edge rush, and that's him. It's like he's built for two games this season, the LSU game and then the Georgia game. He's the kind of guy that you play out of the base defense, and it's going to hurt. It's really unfortunate for Alabama that he's not there for this game because this is the game he's built for.
Is there any way that we walk out of this stadium thinking that, Jake Fromm is a better quarterback than Jalen Hurts? I mean, obviously, if Georgia wins, that'll be that. But going into this game, what we saw against Oklahoma, that game, the back and forthness of it, the fact that I know the running backs made some huge plays, but Fromm had some third down throws that were really crucial to their success. I mean, is it possible outside of a Georgia homer to walk into this game right now thinking before the game that maybe Georgia has a better quarterback than Alabama?
It depends on what you want out of a quarterback. I think if you're going as a pure passer, I think Jake Fromm is a better pure passer than Jalen Hurts. But Jalen Hurts can do so much with the football. I mean, he's a force with the ball in his hands in the running game, and he can make the passes. And his running ability opens up his passing ability. So it's kind of hard to judge them. I think you can leave this game thinking that Jake Fromm's the real deal, though. I think this is a game where he can really prove himself. I mean, I don't even consider really him a true freshman anymore. The same way that you wouldn't really consider Jalen Hurts a true freshman heading into last season's national championship game. And he's a guy that's kind of proven himself, and I think he's kind of underrated.
Well, let's see you pitch yourself to your boss here. So Kyle Henderson, the publisher, will probably write the headlines. But Georgia wins this one. What is the headline on Tuesday morning if Georgia wins the national championship?
Is there a new king in the SEC? I mean, is Georgia now becoming the team to beat in the SEC? It might be a little bit premature to say that, but you got to look at it from another standpoint. They won the SEC title.
Right.
They'll have the championship. This year in recruiting, they're really starting to pick up. It seems like they're building up steam. They're doing everything Alabama was doing when Alabama was building this dynasty.
And it's only year 2 of Kirby, man. This is absurd, man, absurd. The great thing, too, is I think if you go back and you look at the last 10 coaches who've won a national title, most of them have done it within the first 3 or 4 years, whether it's like Urban Meyer, Jimbo Fisher, Nick Saban in Alabama. Gus didn't do it at Auburn, but he got there in year number 1. And so you think you have this whole long, career ahead of you to get this done. But by and large, you have to win it kind of early on to really make it happen for you.
You need that for the momentum. I mean, this whole dynasties in college football are all about momentum. You got to get the recruits coming in. You've got to establish yourself as a coach. And the hot seat for a coach coming in is it's on after year 3 probably.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? If you're not winning by year 3, people start getting worried.
And not to go like hot take here, I don't, obviously it's a national championship. There's a whole lot to lose for Alabama, but win or lose, I don't know if we really look at Alabama any differently. I don't know if losing this game, if we're like, well, this is the demise of them, this is 2 years in a row. But for you, I guess, what would be the headline? If Alabama were to win this one, would they be back? I don't think they've ever left.
I don't think they ever left, but they avoid a lot of the negative headlines. A lot of the 2 straight years is Saban lost a step. It's kind of really funny because if Saban loses this game, there'll be headlines that he lost a step. If Saban wins this game, he'll tie Bear Bryant for most national titles. That's crazy, So he's either going to be, almost unequivocally the best college coach ever, or have lost a step, and that's going to be decided by one game. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous when you think about it, but it really kind of, if you look at the headlines, I bet you that's what the case is.
College football is the silliest sport ever, but I love it, and it's fantastic. There is nothing that is more week to week. I know they try to say about the NFL, but I totally disagree. There's nothing that is more week to week than college football because, I mean, not only you're talking about that week, that season, I mean, you're talking like legacies and all that sort of stuff. I mean, again, Nick Saban wins this, all is well, but if he loses it, I guess there'll be a certain faction of folks that'll be like, this is 2 years in a row. He's able to get to the championship game, but that final push, he's not able to get the buttons pushed right. Does that mean that he needs to change his style? Does he, that sort of stuff, I guess, will kind of emerge if that were all to happen. That being said, I guess maybe we should dovetail this into a prediction, perhaps. I thought Clemson was going to win. I thought Clemson was going to beat Alabama. I'm one of those guys. I also thought Oklahoma was going to beat Oklahoma was going to beat Georgia. I just felt at the end of the day, no matter how bad Oklahoma's defense was, they would make enough. They'd make 1 or 2 stops enough so that Baker Mayfield could outscore Jake Fromm. Totally wrong about that. So take my prediction with a grain of salt, folks. I just don't see how Georgia out Alabama's Alabama. I think Alabama wins this game. I don't know exactly how. I don't know if it's a race, like a race to 24 maybe. I mean, how do you see it shaking out? Is there a certain number in your head? It's a race to 30? Is it a race to 28?
Yeah, I think Georgia will get in the end zone. I do see Alabama winning. Maybe like a 28-17. That number sounds about right. Sure. Georgia scores a couple touchdowns and a field goal. I mean, Georgia's going to get points. I like Georgia's offense too much to say that they're going to get handled as much as Clemson was. But I don't think that. I think you kind of got a point when you say you can't just out Alabama an Alabama team. And this is an Alabama team that got the ultimate second chance. And it's gotten to be refocused, and I just don't see this Alabama team wasting this opportunity. I
mean, just straight from the kickoff against Clemson, you're just like, man, they just look so
that hit by Trayvon Diggs on the opening kickoff, yeah, it's thunderous.
Yeah, and they're going to have to dial that intensity back up. I don't know if they can get it, but at the end of the day, that's all they have to do. They just got to pour everything they have, and they got the next 3 months off or whatever until.
Assuming Alabama has enough juice left, I mean, there are some injury concerns. We mentioned Jennings, and then there's the whole ordeal about Minkah Fitzpatrick and his kidney. Is he peeing blood, or is it falling out of his body? He looked okay during media days.
Lester Cotton being out too. I mean, I know maybe people not talk enough about the offensive line being shook up. I mean, last time they had a shakeup, things went awry in the Iron Bowl. So there's so much to watch for this. Continue to check out BamaInsider.com. Tony will have plenty of stories coming up here. Kyle will be working on things as well. Video features also working up there. Thanks for listening to the podcast, Tony. Thanks for the time, man.
Hey, man. Thanks.
For Tony Sakalis, I'm Aslan Hajavani. Thanks for listening to the Bama Insider Podcast. Take care. Coming up in a few minutes, the final press conference before the national title game. Both Nick Saban and Kirby Smart meet with the media. You can hear from both of them coming up here on BamaInsider.com.
We're certainly excited and happy to have the opportunity as an organization to play in the college football playoff, the championship game in Atlanta, Georgia, which has been a place where we've had several opportunities to play. And I think our players always look forward to the challenges of playing here. I've been really, really pleased with what this team has been able to accomplish this year. We've had to overcome a lot of adversity, and each and every time guys have stepped up and continue to compete at a high level, and something that we have a tremendous amount of appreciation for our staff and all the players on our team for what they've done and the opportunity they've created for themselves to play in the championship game. I think we're playing against an outstanding team. I think Kirby and his staff has done a fabulous job at Georgia in terms of the high level that their players compete at, the quality of players that they have, how well they play together as a team, and certainly they deserve a lot of congratulations for what they've been able to accomplish this year. And I think it's two great teams. It'll be a great competitive game, and our players are certainly looking forward to the challenges and the opportunity of playing in the championship game.
We'll open it up for questions. Again, as a reminder, we've got mic holders positioned throughout the room. Please give us your name and affiliation. We'll start over here on our left-hand side, gentlemen.
Over here, Farhan Lalji from TSN. Guys, a lot's been made about the relationship the two of you had coaching with one another. Coach Smart, if there's one single biggest thing that you learned from Coach Saban, what was it?
Well, this is not the first time I've answered this question this week, so I'll be happy to answer it again. But probably the single greatest thing is just the level of commitment to the organization, holding everybody in the organization to a standard that he kind of embraced himself. You know, he never asked anybody in the organization to work any harder than he did. He held every person on the staff, and I'm not talking about just coaching staff, I'm talking about the entire organization, to be at their best. And I think that's sometimes a lost art in some organizations. You see successful business organizations run that way, but you don't always see athletic programs run that way. And I think he does a tremendous job of that. If there's anything I took, it's being in that seat and having to be in command, make decisions, and make sure that everybody understands the message that's coming from top down and the standard that you want people to work to. And I got a lot of respect. You know, I don't think people appreciate what he's been able to do in the most competitive college football league for a long time. And when you start talking about what he's been able to do, I think it's pretty incredible.
We're going to take our next question over here to our right.
Nick, Ralph Russo with the Associated Press. You talk a lot about the challenges of guarding against complacency and human nature that comes when you have success to try to be successful. Again, that's hard. Your goal is to try to manage that in others and your team. What motivates you to stay, to not be complacent?
Well, I think that I'm always looking for the next challenge. I don't know if it's the way I was raised or whatever, that you know, you're kind of only as good as your last play, as your last game. I think everyone's heard me talk a lot about the fact that success is not a continuum, it's momentary, and it's human nature to get satisfied and get a little complacent when you have success. But in a competitive business like we're in, where there's always a next challenge, there's always a next game, there's always a better team to play, if you have that mindset, you're not going to be able to play with any consistency. And if you can't play with consistency and performance, you're not going to really have a lot of success long term. So I hate to lose. And I've been around Kirby long enough, and he's been on my basketball team long enough that I know he hates to lose too. And I think that has something to do with it. So you're always ready for the next challenge, and you always understand that people are going to be a little bit satisfied, and you have to make sure that everyone is, ready for the next challenge.
We'll go right down here in front in the middle section.
Murray Poole, Bulldog Illustrated. For both coaches, Kirby, with your team flying back from Los Angeles, and Coach Saban, yours coming back, of course, from New Orleans, were you able to approximate practice during the week, kind of get it close to a normal week as you could? How satisfied were you the way they adapted to that situation?
I think it was a challenge. I think everybody forgets that last year there was 9 days between these games, and I certainly think it's a fast turnaround. I think a big deal's been made about it, but we all know that both teams really had the same time. Our travel was different, but they played a much later game, so they had to play much later at night and get finished much later at night. So it was tough in both parts. I think I saw early in the week the trouble with it, but as the weeks passed, these guys have been practicing for 15 games. And also they've had practice for bowls, really 15 practices. So you start looking at some of the cumulative effect, and you got to be smart with your team. You got to know what you're doing. In a perfect world, I'd like to have a little more time between the championship games, but that's the way it felt this year. And that's the way it is. So much time to prepare for one game, and then a really quick turnaround that creates a lot of pressure on these kids for the short turnaround.
Basically, as coaches, we had probably about a normal amount of time that we would have for a normal game during the season. I think the circumstances are a little bit different because of the travel, bowl games, staying at a place, trying to get back, those types of things. But it was a little tougher turnaround for the players. I don't know if it's physically, emotionally, psychologically, however you want to put it, early in the week, to refocus on another big game. But I think as the week, went on, you saw them recover, and I think they're all excited about playing in the game. The situation is the same for both teams, and I don't think it'll have any effect on the outcome based on the circumstances. It'll just be about the players who go out there and how they compete in the game.
Our next question over here in the left.
Justin Felder from Fox 5 Atlanta. Coach Saban, in 2015, right before Kirby was hired at Georgia, you said the guys you coached with for a long time start to feel like part of your family. A lot's been made of the X's and O's of playing against former assistants, but what is it like to see someone go through the highs and lows of being a head coach and ultimately end up here?
Well, I'm extremely proud of anyone on our staff who goes on and does a good job. One thing that I've said is I always tell guys, and I told Kirby this when he left, be your own man, be yourself, do it the way you think it ought to be done. Don't try to be somebody else. And I think he's done a fantastic job of that. But what you all don't understand is, this guy was on our staff for 10 years. Terry's there when his babies are born. You become a part of a family. That's what you do when you're together for a long time. And I think there's a special appreciation for those people in your family, the contribution that they made to the success that you had, and you always want to see them do well when they leave, because that's what they worked hard for, and you're glad that they got the opportunity. And it isn't personal when we have to compete against each other. I'm sure he wants to win for his players, and we certainly want to win for our players. And it's not a personal thing.
We're going to take our next question from the far left again, staying on our far left.
Dan Matthews, 6A, The Fan. For both coaches, what would you say is the single biggest concern entering tomorrow's game?
For us, it's probably simple. They've got an extremely physical offensive and defensive lines. They are as big and as physical as we've faced, and we know we like to run the ball and we like to stop the run. But when you look at the unit that he's comprised and got, it's a dominant physical team, and we've got to match the physicality. They do a tremendous job in all phases. There's no weakness when you look across the board. They play their best players on special teams. And, we've taken a lot of pride in special teams this year at University of Georgia, and we know what we're up against in these guys because they've got tremendous athletes, tremendous speed. And they've had some injuries to deal with. They've overcome those and created some depth with a lot of the injuries they've had, getting some guys back. But the biggest concern for us will be the size of the offensive and defensive lines and the physicality of those guys.
I would say that my biggest concern is how do we execute in terms of the things that are important in having success in a game. Some of them Kirby mentioned, because they're two physical teams. Can you control the line of scrimmage? Are you going to make the kind of errors in the game that are going to be critical factors in the outcome of the game? And turnovers would be, a big part of that. tackling, I always worry about in bowl games and games where you haven't played for a long time. We missed some tackles in last week's game, and the quality of running backs that they have and the skill players that they have, I think, those factors can be huge in a game in terms of doing a good job in those areas. So when you're playing against a really good team, and probably two teams that are fairly evenly matched and two teams that philosophically are not a whole lot dissimilar in terms of the things they want to do to win. Run the ball, don't turn the ball over, play good field position, be good on special teams. So it's going to be the errors in execution, that have a critical effect on the outcome of the game.
We're going to take our next question from the very far right section.
Dennis Dodd, CBS Sports. With the hay kind of in the barn, I wonder what each of you are doing today specifically and how long you'll do it.
I'm just doing whatever he did, so it's not a whole lot difference. I mean, we're trying to go watch a movie tonight, and they're trying to go watch the movie at the same place, so we're having offset 10 minutes. But I think, every program I've ever been a part of, there's some similarities in what they do the day before the game, and I think every coach has his I don't know if you call it superstitions or routine might be a better word, that they use to get themselves ready, get their staff ready, and get their players ready. And I think the next 24 hours can be critical. I've talked a long time about this playoff being perspective. With what perspective do you take this game? And I think that's the one spot that Alabama had a competitive advantage because got a huge chip on their shoulder, thanks to you guys and some of you guys saying that they shouldn't have been included. So they've got something to prove. And I think, every team when they get in the playoffs got something to prove. But how you approach these in the last 24 hours and the things you do mentally are really important to your team's success.
I think the hay in the barn analogy that you use is probably not something that I don't really think of it that way. I think that from yesterday's practice, which is, about 48 hours from the game, give or take, I think the mental practice that a player has, whether it's making calls, watching film, whether you have meetings, whether you have walkthroughs, whether you have chair drills, I think those mental reps that they get, I think physically the hay is in the barn. You're not out there blocking and tackling people, but and we've always tried to focus in those from Thursday's practice until the game, having several opportunities for guys to get the kind of mental practice that may be able to eliminate some mental errors in a game that could affect the outcome of the game.
Take our next question from the left-hand side up on the riser. Okay, we're going to transition over here to the right-hand side, back in the front.
Kirk Bowles from the Austin American Statesman. Kirby, first, though, which movie are you going to see?
To be honest with you, I'm not sure the name of it. I'm excited about it, but I've been told it has a lot of purpose, and we got a special release. I think Alabama was able to watch it last week, but I think it's 12 strong.
Yeah, it's a good movie. I don't know what we're watching. Don't ask.
Nick, as long as you were with Kirby, watching your game from afar, you seem to yell at Kirby a lot less on the sideline than maybe some assistants. I wonder, is he the assistant you've been most aligned with in terms of philosophy and game day adjustments as you've ever been with? And do you have to change all your signals before Monday's game?
I don't know. I don't yell at my assistants very much at all, I don't think. But there are occasions where you get upset with whether it's a circumstance in the game or a situation in the game, or maybe you did something that's sort of out of the plan, and you get a little upset about it. I don't really ever recall getting really upset at Kirby. I'm sure that he can remember a few times that I got on him unjustifiably, and maybe a couple times where it was justified. I don't know, but look, it's always about trying to make somebody better and make them understand. And I think we play a very emotional game sometimes. So I never want to get angry, and I never want to be mad, and I never want to show disappointment in a player or a coach. So, but Kirby did as good a job as anybody ever did for us in terms of the time he was with us and whatever his role was, and especially when he was in a position of responsibility.